The debate is on. Look, in this video, I'm digging deeper into America's affordable housing crisis. I'm going to be responding to a thoughtful and very detailed comment from @Rifle VFX Portfolio. All right, so together we're going to explore generational comparisons, income and raises, and how today's job market looks completely different than it did for our parents. Now, here's the truth. Housing has always been one of the largest expenses in any family's budget. But despite today's higher prices, there are ways forward. So let's break this down. All right. Now, look, this is a really long comment. So I'm going to unpack it section by section. I'm not going to read the entire thing. All right. But one quick reminder before we dive in. Real estate is hyper local. National headlines and social media chatter often paint with a very, very broad brush. But the truth is that every city, every neighborhood, and every family situation is different. So don't let the national echo chamber skew how you understand your local housing market. All right. Rifle wrote, my wife is a doctor. I stay at home with her kids. Her parents at our age had almost the same setup, but they bought a larger, newer home in a better location. We make more money now, but we can't get the same. All right. Now, I kind of paraphrase that a little bit from exactly what his words were, but look, Rifle, I hear you. You're right. This isn't an isolated story, but here's the key. Your situation today isn't identical to what your parents faced in the 80s and 90s. The family dynamics, career dynamics, and even the way communities grew are very different today than they were during the Back to the Future and Breakfast Club era. So let's dig into why. All right. In 1985, the average home cost was $100,825. Now, if we fast forward to 2025, that number is $522,000. That's nearly a 4x increase in 40 years. All right, so normally I say that home prices double every 15 years, but this period actually showed doubling almost every 10 years. All right, but here's the twist. In 1985, mortgage rates averaged 13%, but today they hover around 6.5%. Now that's still high compared to recent lows, but it's only half of what buyers were facing back when your parents were buying. All right? Now, if you put 5% down on the average home, your payment in 1985 was about $1,059. Well, today that payment's closer to $3,135. That's roughly 3 times higher than it was in 85. Yet, as a percentage of household income, today's housing costs are actually 4.5% lower than they were in 1985. That's the side of the story that the headlines often don't tell us. All right, so let's look at the debt factor. This is the real problem with affordability. Isn't actually the house. All right, it's not just about the home prices. It's about debt. All right, in 1985, most families didn't carry much consumer debt. But today, student loans, credit cards, and car payments consume massive chunks of household income. Medical school alone can saddle new doctors with a mortgage-sized student loan payment. Look, in my 30-year plus real estate career, I've worked with clients carrying medical school debt that was equal to the price of a starter home. When I was a kid in the mid-'80s, my parents drilled into me the importance of saving and avoiding debt. Today, I see too many households borrowing their way into a lifestyle that they can't sustain. This only ends in bankruptcy or foreclosure. All right, so that's why I actually believe that affordability has much more to do with financial literacy and personal money management as it does with the actual housing market itself. Now, this is the second part within your comment was when it comes to raises, typically across all fields and all generations, raises now do not even meet, let alone exceed, inflation. Look, you mentioned that raises aren't keeping pace with inflation, and you're right. The numbers prove that, all right? So back in 1990, the median U.S. household income was $63,830. Now, by 2022, it was $80,610. Look, that's a 26% increase over 32 years. But the real story here is that that's less than 1% a year. That's hardly enough to keep up with rising costs. All right? But see, during that time, there's been economic downturns, from savings and loan crisis to the dot-com bust, the Great Recession, and the COVID pandemic. All of these things interrupted wage growth. All right, raises lagged, and inflation has, in fact, eroded purchasing power. Right? So, inflation actually hit 9.1% in June of 2020. That's the highest it's been in like 40 years. But that spike, that was actually the exception, not the rule. For decades, inflation mostly stayed below 5%, often closer to 3%, but still, that's been enough to outpace most wage growth. So here's what people forget. 99% of American businesses are small businesses. These employers simply don't have the financial cushion or of any of those like billion-dollar corporations that the media likes to tout about. When recessions hit, small businesses cut back on raises, and in a lot of cases, they actually shut down completely. Well, that has a direct impact on household income and, by extension, affordability. All right, so when I realized that trading my time for a salary wasn't going to build wealth, I started working for myself back in 2001. Now, it has not been easy, but it taught me the simple truth. Wealth comes from owning things and building your own dreams, not just working to build somebody else's dream. All right, so let's look at your next comment, part 3. This is jobs. Again, anecdotally, from my personal experience, growing up, I watched my dad, whenever he wanted a new job, he sent one application and got the job immediately whenever he wanted to change. Well, that's over decades. Recently, in the last 5 to 10 years or so, which is roughly around the time house prices started skyrocketing astronomically, I would send literally hundreds, sometimes thousands of applications per year and hear back from maybe 1 or 2 places. Usually a rejection. Man, that's rough. All right, I get that. I've actually done the same thing. There have been times over the last several years that I tried applying for jobs and I couldn't get anywhere, right? But you brought up your dad's ability to get jobs compared to your own struggles in recent years. In the 80s, finding work meant hand delivering a resume or walking into a business to shake somebody's hand. Networking was local, it was personal, and it was face-to-face. Today, applying online means competing with thousands of applicants worldwide. AI filters resumes based on keywords before a human ever sees them. Okay, so social media scrutiny can sink your chances before you even get interviewed. It's not that you're less qualified than your dad, it's that the system itself has changed. If you've been sending out thousands of applications without results, look, Rifle, that's a sign that it's a process problem. It's not just the market. You need a different strategy, okay? So let's put this in perspective, all right? Every generation faces unique challenges. Boomers had like 13% interest rate cuts. Gen X watched recessions wipe out equity. Millennials faced the 2008 crash just as they entered the workforce, and Gen Z now battles high prices and student debt. As a Gen X kid, I was a bridge between the analog boomer world and the digital millennial world. Each generation has to adapt to new realities without a roadmap. That's why affordability looks so different depending on where you stand. All right? At the end of the day, affordability is deeply personal. It's macroeconomic headlines that make it sound like doom and gloom, but the truth is your microeconomy, your income, your debt, your financial choices, that's what determines affordability more than national averages. If you want to become a homeowner, you can't just wait for the national picture to improve. You need to take control of your own finances, clean up your debt, position yourself to jump in when the right opportunity comes. And look, I appreciate this dialogue because this is such an important conversation for every generation. Man, keep your comments coming. Let's keep this dialogue going, okay? I'm Joshua Christensen with Christensen Properties, powered by Realty One of New Mexico. If you're buying or selling in Albuquerque, I would love to guide you through this challenging market.